April of Yes to Next here with my mom, Aiko.
Hi.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
We're excited to help you kick off 2022 with a focus on you and helping you say yes to your next steps to getting stronger and healthier. All right. So if you're new to our channel, welcome.
Welcome.
Congratulations on taking a step to improve your life. All right, and you're joining a family of thousands of Yes to Next friends from around the world. Yeah, and we're all getting stronger together. So we're excited to announce a 7-day fitness challenge.
Here we go.
That we're starting tomorrow.
All right.
Yes, and in order to lay a foundation for our work this week, we thought it'd be helpful to talk with an expert on how to stay healthy. So we had the honor of talking with Dr. Audrey Chun, who specializes in geriatric medicine at Mount Sinai Medical Center in New York. And so she shares a lot of great information. We learned a lot. We're inspired by her and her humanity. Mom, any thoughts on this week or Dr. Chun?
The challenge and the New Year is a new beginning, so everyone has their resolutions to stay healthy and get fit. So we're here to help you do that. As far as the interview, I think you'll find it very interesting because Dr. Chun presents the information in a very special way that you really get the points of what she is trying to say as you get older and what to look for, what to do, what not to do. So I think you'll find it very interesting.
Yeah. And even for folks who are under 50, I think this information is helpful because it's important for you to know, what to expect as you get older. All right. So without further ado, let's have a chat with Dr. Chun. So thank you, Dr. Chun, for taking the time to talk with us about living healthy after age 50. Just to start out, thanks. Just to start out, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and what your typical day looks like?
Sure. Well, I am a physician who specializes in geriatrics and palliative medicine. So basically, I just am, I guess, an expert in what changes occur in bodies at a little bit older age. And so the center, the Martha Stewart Center for Living, where we see our patients, some people get confused because they think it's an actual center or a day center where people are going, but it's actually a medical practice where we really focus on whole person care for older adults. Usually we mean over the age of 75.
Wow.
And when we talk about whole person care, we're really trying to match medical care to what that person values and prioritizes most. I think, as you've alluded to in your channel, there are obviously changes that happen as you get into your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and certainly as you get into your 100s, which many of our patients are. And rather than just adding more medications for every condition someone gets, we really try to prioritize what's most important to you at this stage in your life. And let's try to come up with a treatment plan that makes sense for helping you achieve whatever those goals might be. So sometimes it's medications, but oftentimes it has nothing to do with medications and more around your lifestyle, connecting you to resources in your community. So that might be exercise classes, it might be social engagement types of programs that might be in your community, as well as things like physical therapy or occupational therapy, getting your hearing aids adjusted, or really trying to focus in on what's most important to you and matching your care to that.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And that's a perfect segue to our first questions, which is, what is happening to our bodies, after age 50? I'm 57. My mom is
81. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're at different stages of being older adults. So it'd be helpful if you could talk about what happens at 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and take it from there.
Yeah, things change. I always hate blaming anything on age alone, but there are changes that occur physiologically as we all get older, if we're lucky enough to get older. So for women in particular, as you start reaching your 50s, that's a time that many people are reaching their menopausal years. And that's a really big physiologic change as your hormone levels are adjusting to a different state. And the biggest change is probably a decrease in your bone health and your muscle mass. And so it's actually really important before you're 50 to build up as much bone and muscle as you possibly can, but then particularly important to support that in your 50s. So making sure your diet includes things like calcium and vitamin D. And it's actually preferable to get that in your food kind of whole foods as opposed to supplements. But if you're unable to get it in your diet, then supplementing at that time. And then really making sure your physical activity includes weight bearing or strengthening exercises to maintain your bone health and even to build it up a little bit if you didn't do as good a job as you could have in the earlier years. And that trend continues as you go into your next decades of life. So you lose your bone health, you actually start losing muscle mass. And this is both for men and women. And it becomes incredibly important to try to maintain your muscle mass through diet as well as strengthening and exercise, because those are the things that keep you functional. So if you lose your muscle mass, then you can't keep your balance as well, that you can't, you're more susceptible to falls. And these are all things that really affect your ability to function and stay independent in your oldest age. So in your 60s and 70s, it's really about trying to maintain your strength and your endurance and your imbalance in order to kind of give you the best quality of life or the best chance of remaining physically independent.
Right. And we're all about keeping moving, to your point, and focusing on balance, flexibility, and strength training, to build that muscle.
Right.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about the different ailments that you see with your patients and, things that you alluded to, the things that you preventive medicine kind of things that you recommend to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we age, you become more susceptible to things that are more common. So chronic conditions start developing, and sometimes at much earlier age, and then many times in 50s and 60s, people start developing things like high blood pressure or diabetes. And so those are really common things that we manage. And it's really important actually in your 50s, if you haven't established care with a regular doctor, that you do that so that you can be monitored for those conditions, as well as for general health screenings like cancer screenings and things like that for prevention. So we manage those typically with medication and with lifestyle. There are a lot of things that we manage that people don't think that can be managed. So they may be embarrassed to bring it up with their doctors, but in fact, there are treatments that are available. So women especially, but men as well, as they start getting into their 60s, 70s, 80s, may develop things like urinary incontinence. So they may not be able to hold on to their urine as easily as they once used to. Their balance may be affected so that they're not, either they're actually falling, or feel at risk for falling. So that becomes a common concern and something that we manage. There are changes to taste and smell. So people may not drink as much as they would normally because they don't feel thirsty, or they may not have as much hunger. So people may be losing weight because they just don't have the appetite they used to. There are hearing and vision changes that come with aging. And the thing with all of those is that many people just think, I'm old and this is what I have to live with. But that's not necessarily true. There are often treatments and ways to optimize that. And we know more and more that not treating any of those conditions or not addressing them actually puts you at higher risk of disability and even cognitive impairment or dementia. So we think it's a really important thing that you bring that up with your doctor. And there are often simple measures you can do to help improve that function.
Very good. You kind of alluded to the fact of, being immobile and not moving and sitting. As you said, if you're in pain, your propensity is just to sit there, right? As opposed to move. So can you talk to us about, the effects of just sitting too much, and how much should we sit in a day?
Well, so as much as possible, we shouldn't be sitting. We should try to stay as active as possible. And especially as we get into that older age group, I tell my patients that it's really use it or lose it time. The more you sit, the less you get out of bed, the less likely or less, easily you'll be able to get back that function. So once you lose it, it's very easy to lose function. It's very hard to gain that back. And so it's really important to try to be motivated to continue moving. within limits and parameters. And I think we also have to give permission to ourselves to listen to our bodies. And so if there are really terrible pains or you're having a lot of imbalance and you're trying to push through it, but that puts you at more risk of having falls or problems, then obviously we want people to be safe and not hurt themselves in the process of moving. But one of the things that I'll encourage, it doesn't have to be dramatic. So you don't have to go from not doing anything at all to running a marathon, right? So it could be even as, let's try to walk for a minute a day, or march in place for a minute a day, or stand up and sit down 10 times in a day if you haven't been doing that sort of a thing. So it doesn't have to be a tremendous amount of activity. It just has to be some activity if you've not done anything. And if you are a very active person, then to try to maintain that, because the longer you really push that, the longer you can maintain it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm interested in that whole idea of investing in your health at earlier stages in your life. So whether you're in your 40s, 50s, exercising now, how does that affect your health in your 60s, 70s, and beyond?
Yeah, we know that those who kind of have been physically active tend to be healthier in older age. There are lots of longitudinal studies that show that, different aging studies in both the United States and in Europe and in Asia, that those people who tended to be a little bit more physical active and healthier in younger life tend to continue those habits and have less disability in older life. That being said, for people who have never really been that active, it's never too late. So we have tons of evidence that shows, even at the most frail stages in people who might be in long-term care facilities, that even a small incremental increase in activity has great benefit in both function as well as cognitive reserve and just general well-being. So it's never too late. So I don't want people to say, I never did it in my entire life and why start now? You can start now, even with small steps, and there's benefit to that.
Yeah, that's true.
That's awesome.
I mean, we're at different spectrums, but the common thread is to be fit, to be moving, to exercise. Yeah, it doesn't change no matter what the age.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's good.
You want to ask a question about mindfulness? I know you had that on your mind.
Well, I just think that as you get older, there's a tendency to be alone, and that can create a sense of loss or loneliness, I think, depression. And that must be something that you deal with quite often, I think, in your patients, the sense of being alone. And that must be very difficult for a lot of people.
It is really difficult. And I think this last year and a half really highlighted how challenging it can be to maintain social connections when we had to isolate, and not everyone was fortunate enough to be in a situation where they could isolate with other people. And certainly as people age, oftentimes their social network starts getting smaller and smaller. So if you're lucky to live into your 80s and 90s, oftentimes your friends may not have come along with you, right? And so the number of people that you can interact with changes over time, and oftentimes it starts narrowing to maybe just your neighbors or just your family. And you point out something so important, that those social connections are incredibly important for maintaining kind of mental well-being, as well as your cognitive health, kind of maintaining your memory. So the social connections are incredibly important. And so I do really encourage people, you don't have to have a lot of social network, but to really make the quality of the ones that you do have really count. And, I sometimes joke around that maybe it's always good to get a nice friend group of people who are 10 years younger than you. So that you've got other people that you can continue enjoying time with and going out to do things. What I think has been really interesting in the last year and a half is that now that we've all gotten used to these video interactions, the number of people who have been able to adapt, I would never have predicted that, my 90-year-old patients would be able to connect so readily and easily on FaceTime or on Zoom or other ways. And people really, I think the ones who did are the ones who were a bit curious, instead of saying, I can't do it, saying, okay, I'm stuck with it. This is the only thing that I can do. I'm going to try to figure out and learn how to do that, and having people help them walk through it. And then really finding ways to successfully engage. So there are a lot of people who found, they couldn't meet with their regular writing group at their senior center, but they figured out a way to do it on telephone and over video for people, who maybe couldn't figure out their video capabilities. They were able to meet on phone and do like a conference call to do that and still stay connected. So I think it's really encouraging that we can use technology. It's not for everyone, but in a way that we didn't predict. I really would not have anticipated that. 2.5 years ago, I would have thought, no way, they're not going to do it. And surprisingly, people have. So I think that was a lesson for me too, that we can connect in lots of different ways.
That is very true.
That's very true.
Yeah.
So drilling down a little bit more on that, if there is a older adult who is alone and really doesn't know where to begin, to create those social connections or, get out of that, what would you recommend that they do? Are there resources or people they can reach
there
out
are
to?
resources. Like in our medical practice, we have social workers who can help connect to community resources, find out what that person's interests are, and try to connect them to like-minded people, so they can either learn something new or contribute or interact with a hobby or something that's interested them over time. So that could be anything from writing to music to teaching to mentoring, lots of different opportunities. For those, not every practice is fortunate to have a social worker. So that's where it's useful to connect with the day community, with your church, or your temple, or your place of worship is another great place to find a community. Most places have senior centers of some sort, and even just calling to find out what programs do you have. And oftentimes those senior centers also have social workers involved where they can help people navigate what kinds of interests might be able to get connected, for different individuals to find new social networks, really.
Yeah.
It's good.
We're very lucky to have a really great senior center in our town. So that's really, really great
It's
advice.
important. That's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you touched on nutrition a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What should we be eating? And are hot dogs okay?
I love hot dogs.
She eats organic hot dogs.
An occasional hot dog is fine. It's really fine. But generally speaking, I mean, there are so many different fads and whether we should be intermittent fasting or do a Mediterranean. The bottom line is that in the commonality to all the things that seem to be beneficial are, having a more plant-based diet. You don't have to be vegetarian, but really focusing on whole foods, grains, fruits, vegetables is kind of like a big portion of what you're eating. Having a little bit of protein, and, if it's meat, if it's not meat, it's fine, whatever your preferences are. And then in moderation, things like sugar, salt, those sorts of things, you need them to live, but you want to have those in more moderation. So there's no magic to it. It's really about eating whole foods. I really encourage my patients to look at their plate, and half of their plate really should be vegetables and fruits with lots of different colors. A quarter of it should be a protein of some sort, and then a quarter of it should be a carb that they enjoy. So if it's a more complex carb, even better, but a quarter of your plate can be whatever carb that you're enjoying, and that tends to be a pretty balanced meal for folks. And when we talk about moderation, it's of those other things, it's also moderation of things like alcohol. Generally, if you don't drink, it's a great thing that you don't drink. If you enjoy drinking, to limit it to no more than one beverage a day, an alcoholic beverage, for both men and women. It used to be, we said, oh, men could have double, but no, not any longer. We say just one, limit it if you can.
We're all equal.
All equal, exactly, related to alcohol at least. And then also not to eat too much. So you want to try to maintain your weight. So some people are naturally thin and they tend to lose weight in older age, in which case they need to make sure that their nutrition is keeping up with their weight, because we want them to maintain their weight. But some people, their metabolism changes a little bit differently and they actually easily gain weight, and you want to try to maintain, again, your healthy weight. So everything in moderation, not too much, not too little. And most people can get the nutrients that they need through that sort of a diet. I think the one exception, particularly for women, is calcium and vitamin D. For strong bones, we recommend about 1,200 milligrams of calcium in a day. The preference is to have that in your diet. There were a few studies that suggested very high dose of calcium supplements, like in a supplement form, may not be so great for your heart. And so it's really better. That same finding wasn't if you had it in your diet. So we really encourage it in your diet, and whatever you can't get in your diet, then to supplement that, but not to do 1,200 milligrams of calcium alone, in addition to whatever is in your diet. And then vitamin D in Nevada, you probably don't have as much of a problem getting vitamin D from the sun. But in New York City, where it's a little bit darker and grayer during the winter, it's really common for us to develop vitamin D deficiency. And low vitamin D is not good for your bones, obviously, but it's been associated with lots of other bad things, including depression, different kinds of cancer, falls risk. And so we really do recommend that people supplement during the winter if they live in a northern climate with no sun. And it's not unreasonable to ask your physician as you get older to check a vitamin D level just to make sure you're getting adequate amounts. But I would say those are the two that probably are most important to pay attention to, and everything else you should be able to get in a good diet. And so not a big proponent. I'm not pushing people to take tons of other supplements. I'll often have people come in and they say, I take so many medicines. And I say, you only take 2 prescription medicines. And then they pull out their bag of, 12 different supplements. I said, who told you to take these things, and it's often unnecessary.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, we're coming in the home stretch here. Are there any resources that you'd like to our audience to know about? Monsani, anything that they should check into regarding being healthy after 50?
Yeah, well, I think the NIH, or the National Institute of Health and National Institute of Aging, they actually have really great resource pages on different balance exercises, strength, diet, and it's kind of a really balanced resource, I think, for people to check out, and kind of a wealth of information that's there. So I'll often refer people there if they want more specifics about, what should I be eating, or what kind of an exercise is a good balance exercise. And there are a variety of things that you can choose from and try at your convenience or in the safety of your own home. So I do encourage that.
That is awesome.
Very
Okay,
nice.
One final question. It's more, our one of our mottos is fitness and joy at any age. So we're wondering if there is a quote or a person that inspires you.
That's a hard one.
Oh no.
What am I going to say? I don't know. That's a good one to be asking. I would say one of my patients the other day, was going down a list of things that were happening to them, right? So they said, oh, my back hurts, my knee hurts. And at the end of kind of going through there, they're like, but I'm not complaining, because every day that I wake up to those things, it's another day that I get to be here, and was like just really grateful and had a lot of gratitude for life. And that was something kind of meaningful to me as I was thinking about it. How many days do we get up and we're like, this isn't working, or this person made me mad, or this aches, and this isn't, I'm dizzy, I don't feel well. But instead to flip it to be like, I'm actually grateful to be experiencing this today, because the alternative is not where I'm ready to go at the moment. And so it's not a specific quote, but it was something that, I learn all the time from my patients, and that was a great reminder for me to remain grateful and mindful of all the things that we do have.
Very nice.
What a wonderful way to end our chat.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that inspiration. And thank you so much for taking the time to share with us this super helpful information.
Very enjoyable time.
Yes.
Wonderful. Invite me back anytime.
All right. We
Bye.
look forward to seeing you. Thank you so much, Dr. Chun.
You're welcome.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. See you soon.
We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Chun and found it helpful. If you like this video, please give a like, share a comment, and subscribe to our channel. We're very excited to kick off our 7-day fitness challenge starting tomorrow.
Okay.
So get ready. Get your shoes on.
Get your shoes on.
Get the water ready. All right? And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching and joining us.
See you soon.